Welcome to my video on avoiding disasters and staying sane for a small business. As a small business owner, you probably are very concerned about things like cash flow, profit, rental space, supplies, etc. And unless you have a plan to mitigate those or work on those, they can occupy your brain and cause you concern and kind of worry and stress. So this video is about how to take the things you're concerned with and put them in one place and build an action plan out of it. So the approach we're going to take today to avoid disaster and keep sane is risk and opportunity management. Now, an analogy of that is this patient here going into surgery to have a problem fixed, whatever the surgery is. But he or she also has potential problems that could occur, the downside of doing surgery. Also, some positive outcomes that could occur too. And the purpose of these people over here is to make it more likely to get a positive outcome and less likely to make it have a negative outcome. And so we're not discussing things that are guaranteed here. If they're guaranteed problems, poor guy has a broken leg, then that goes on a problem list and you're fixing the problem. So again, a current issue now. We're discussing things that are not guaranteed to occur. Either positive things, outcomes, or negative things, potential problems or potential opportunities. So to keep our risk and opportunity data organized, we're going to use a table. The table template's down below. And so the first column is the brainstorm list. So we're going to put a big long list here of things that could go wrong and then things that could kind of go right. Okay. And so later we're going to use our R flag or O column there flag to organize the list. But you're probably going to have far more negative things, which is fine, than positive, but you want to work on them separately. So we're going to organize by R and O later. I'm going to discuss the negative ones first, and then come back at the end of the video and discuss positive. So first thing we do is get a long list. Okay? And I'll give you an example of where that list comes from in a few minutes. The next thing we do is then discuss consequence. We want to get a worst case scenario figured out just to see how bad it is. Okay? So if you have a risk over here, suppliers may be late. Now, just really how bad is that? Are you going to lose money? Is there a penalty? Are you going to miss a deadline? I'm going to just kind of write down the worst case scenario. We may not actually get that, but it'd be nice to know just kind of how bad it is. After consequence, we'll look at the impact and the likelihood. Now, not everything is the same priority in terms of mitigation, and so we want to organize the list by impact 1 through 10, where 1 is low impact and 10 is very high impact to the company. Then likelihood, where 1 is very unlikely to occur and 10 is likely to occur. Now 10 would not be guaranteed. If it's guaranteed, it goes onto a problem list to be acted upon now. But 10 is very likely to occur given a scale of 1 through 10. Because we don't have the bandwidth or the time to work on everything all the time, we're going to do priority just by multiplying the two numbers together. Now we get a scale from 1 to 100. And we can focus on the top few things first, and then time permitting, work on the things lower than that. Now there are 2 levels of action we're going to take. The first one is proactive, and making the likelihood going to go down for negative risks. And so we're not going to wait until the risk actually occurs and then deal with it. We want to make it less likely. There are things we can do proactively. This is the proactive column, to make sure we can do things ahead of the game to make it less likely to occur. For example, if it was an issue with a supplier and they're going to be late, maybe we call them up, maybe we help them out, maybe we figure out what assistance they need. It's going to keep on going. Maybe we figure out there are things they need from us. It's going to keep on going. So there are things we could do to kind of help our supplier out if that's the risk we are dealing with. And then the last column, actions as a backup plan. So if we're unable to cause the risk to go away or make it less likely to occur, and it actually does occur, it's realized, then what are our backup plans over here? We may have 1 or 2 backup plans. Now we may not invoke those until the risk actually occurs, supplier fails or whatever, but it'd be good to know what the backup plan is, so we can quickly go to it and actually do it, versus then kind of flounder when the risk is realized and then have to come up with a backup plan. So we may have quite a few things over here to make it less likely to occur, proactive things, and a few things over here kind of reactive things should there be a major problem occurring and we have to kind of jump to our backup plan. So I apply this risk technique to my own company, the two small businesses I'm part of. One is about sales, not selling a particular quarter of the year. That was put in the list. A thing of concern that made it to the list to be mitigated. I had a client request a 4-day event from me. The materials for that were in different locations, in the different files and whatever. And the issue was, can I put them together quickly enough and figure out the workflow of that data to give to the client? It was a 4-day class I was teaching to them. So all the stuff existed, but putting it together and kind of eyeing it out was the risk. I actually broke that one there, the heading there, into a couple of risks here to look at. But by doing this, I'm basically putting my concern list, what could go wrong, onto a list. Now, there are more items in my list. It's kind of just their summary, and I'll show you the positive ones at the end. Now, after you have the brainstorm in the first column, which probably will take 15 to 20 minutes, going to do, not difficult. Oh, and if you do have colleagues you work with, involve them. They have unique and valuable ideas that go into the list. So if you have more than one person in the company, involve your staff in that activity. So you end up with a list over here. Now, it could be a little overwhelming at the beginning, but keep in mind we're about to mitigate it and kind of make it better. So if you feel more negative towards the end, it's okay. You may feel more negative towards the end of the list, but keep in mind it'll be temporary because we're going to have you then work on the positives and then mitigate those items. So let's take a look at the data, and I'll go through a couple of items line by line. So let's take the first one first. I don't sell second quarter 2022. I'm sure you have sales risks too in your company. And so the worst case, the absolute worst, is I dig into savings for a little while, savings of the company for a while, to kind of cover income. That's the worst case. After many, many years in business, not so bad. If it's the first few years of business, more bad, badder, but not so bad. But that's the worst case scenario. If I go to the right a bit more, then I give it a priority number, 5 for impact, middle of the road. Okay, so 10 is very high impact, 1 is very low impact, so 5. Bit annoying, 5. Likelihood, again, 10 is very likely to occur, and 1 is unlikely to occur. And so 7 is 2/3 of the way up the scale there. Just a way to kind of pin it compared to the other risks in the list. I get a number of 35, which actually is pretty low. Given this goes from 1 to 100, okay, then now I realize that compared to maybe other things, not so bad, okay. However, I can still mitigate it. Now, after I do the long list, I can actually focus on the big numbers first. Maybe my 40 gets worked on first, and then my 35, and then my 34, whatever. You may have bigger numbers, which is just okay. But the idea of this scale here, the priority number, is to then focus on a few things first and get them out of the way, and then worry less about the other ones kind of later. Now, taking these two examples and then going to the right with the actions. Okay. So looking at the sales item first, what can I do to make it less likely I will not sell second quarter of the year? I could contact potential clients, people I know that are looking to buy something eventually, or may have bought something for third and fourth quarter and could actually have them start now. Could I drag a few of those into the second quarter and have them start? Maybe that would help their schedule a little bit if they want to kind of balance out the work over a longer period of time. And by doing that, I can have now room to sell third and fourth quarter, which is more likely because it's kind of further out. That's one thing. I could focus on selling more, so I could maybe contact people that are prospects. Maybe I have 10, 15 prospects. I could touch base with them, look again at kind of what their concerns are, their issues, their problems, kind of how their life is going, and provide some kind of updates to that with the idea that they would make them want to kind of buy my service or kind of start with me earlier. I could improve marketing. I could then find maybe audiences that are not my current audience, but maybe other audiences that I could sell to, and then kind of promote that. So there may be some webinars or other things I could do to basically get more interest elsewhere than I'm getting now. Now, in my company, what I've found is that when I think something's open and I look at the risk of it and start to mitigate, then somebody out of the blue kind of randomly fills that gap. I'm just kind of fortunate that way kind of now. But back in the day when I started, that wasn't always the case, and there was a lot more activity going on selling than I do kind of do now. Now, if I'm unable to mitigate it and make the likelihood go down to 0 or kind of a low number, then what is the backup plan? The backup plan is to allocate a certain amount of our company savings and they're going to use that. Okay. So at least we're going to know what the backup plan is going forward. So the other one was these risks combined, broken out. The issue there is that the class I had sold existed in its components over the years, but they were kind of scattered and they didn't kind of fit well together or well enough. And so out of that risk, I came up with these ones here. Too much stuff to kind of fill into 4 days. I'm collecting from all over the place on my network of stuff, of files and PowerPoints and whatever. Too much stuff to kind of cram into 4 days, so I've got to figure that out. Another one, a big one, was the workflow. And so when I teach that particular course, I'm pulling together bits and pieces that I'm going to know and love, but they don't fit together particularly well. And so we have to kind of work on that, kind of make sure it's kind of ironed out. So when the customer sees it, they see a clean fit of all the pieces together, what they've asked for. There were templates they could use for the exercises in the class. They were sometimes in Word, sometimes in Excel. So I had to kind of figure out which way do I want to go, because there's a lot more labor to keep an Excel thing up to date and formatting than a Word document. Time required to do it. The terms and language of the class, again, that may not match the client's language, kind of how they describe things. They had a very unique language they used for testing and design and whatever they were doing. And then this was a virtually delivered class with MS Teams, Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams works okay. Kind of buggy. I never said that. And so if I'm hosting a team session with 30 people for 4 days, it's got to work. It's just got to work. And so having a half working, half not working, buggy, kind of falls over, whatever system would have been a problem. So I had to kind of work on that one too. So the second step was to look at the consequence. How bad would it be if it were to occur? That can help you sometimes figure out, not that bad. Why worry that much? Okay? Other times, if it is bad, it helps you figure out the impact. So if I said this is a big consequence to me, a major consequence, that may give it a larger number. Okay? If I said it's a small consequence, I could work around that and make it a smaller number of impact. So the consequence discussion helps you clarify in your head if it's going to be a large number or a small number of impact. Okay? So we go through and figure out the likely consequence, worst case, and then we give it an impact and a likelihood number. If you didn't know which way to go, whether it's going to be likely or unlikely, give it a 5. Okay, 5 is midpoint between 1 and 10, kind of an average. So you don't know, it could go 5 either way. If you know it's very likely to occur, then give it a 7, 8, 9. If it's guaranteed, it comes off the list because it's now a problem to work on versus a risk. If it's very unlikely to occur, give it a 1 through 5 or 1 through 4 number. And then when you do that, you can then multiply the two numbers together, what the spreadsheet will do for you, and it then tells you where to focus. So I'm going to focus on the 40 first, okay, and then maybe the 35 over here, and then go down the list. Now, if you have time, then you can mitigate every risk item, okay, but you know where to go focus. If you don't have that much time, then the number system on the priority column tells you where to go work on first, because you want to work on the things with either high impact or high likelihood or high both, and kind of get those out of the way first. So the next step is to look at the actions column. You want to spend more time here because you're being proactive at this point. You're not waiting for the risk to occur and then react to it under duress and strain and stress. You're thinking about what the problem could be, the risk, and then taking smaller, earlier actions, cheaper actions to make it the likelihood going to go down. And so more focus is spent over here, I think, to make it less likely of having a risk actually occur. Now, on the example I had at the beginning of the too much work to going to do for the client, so the too many topic areas for 4 days, what do we do? I had a series of concepts I had sold the client on, so I'm going to work backwards from those and figured out what they really asked for and making sure I at least fitted that to the class, and then anything extra I could figure out kind of where it's going to fit, if it fit at all. And if I focused on the class exercises, the things the students would do in the class, and got those ironed out, I could put the materials kind of grouped around that. Again, that would help me filter out things that are redundant or kind of overkill for the class. So whereas before I was thinking I have all these things I could cram into the class, okay, where do I start? Working from the end point, what I had sold them specifically, and the way they would work in the class, help me kind of work backwards and figure out the essentials. Now, the risk about the workflow, do the materials I'm giving to the client actually stitch together correctly? Do they actually work together, or are they kind of very cumbersome? I did a thorough review with my business partner Mary, who is particularly good at critiquing things like that. And I went through the class very quickly with her and figured out where the key terms are, the key exercises, the key concepts, and had her critique those kind of trade-offs. So I could figure out, no, I'm saying one thing over here, but within a day I'm saying something else. And she could then critique that. I was too close to the material to see that. So we really ironed out, I think, almost every issue in the class just by an examination by Mary. Good job, Mary. The template issue. Do I have templates in Excel, Word, or some other kind of format? And so I decided to kind of break them up. I'd have the ones I already had in Word. They're easy to manage. And I would actually build a separate template in Excel for people to use, but I wouldn't mix match. I wouldn't kind of over complicate the type of work they were doing in the class. So I kind of sorted that one out too. Worked out pretty well. So the last one was managing the risk of Microsoft Teams. Again, Teams, the software package, works pretty well for a small meeting where there's simple kind of interaction by video and audio. But when you are hosting a class for 4 days and using some of their advanced features, like breakout rooms and whatever, you've got to have things kind of work correctly. Otherwise, it gets into a big mess very quickly. So in that case, we did some kind of trials beforehand. We had students log in early, going to test their links. I actually gave them a kind of test link beforehand they could work through. I did some breakout room experiments with my business partner, and actually I think a while back I did it with my kids too. Can I actually run the features correctly, quickly, with a dummy audience, not dummy, but a pretend audience, and got those kind of worked out too. Now, actually, we did have a few problems in Teams in the session. Teams has some bugs where it corrupts data. Kind of the people logging in, they get corrupted in their login ID. And so I learned to work around session there. Basically to kind of delete breakout rooms, kind of add new ones, and then move people around. So I learned that skill too. So eventually we kind of got through it. But there were things we had to kind of practice and kind of prepare for to make sure we had a good workable plan for that. Now our backup plan was Zoom. Zoom works better, to be honest. And so I made sure Zoom was an option. So if we really kind of struggle with Teams, we could then issue a link to Zoom and then keep on going within about 10 minutes. So let's look at some examples of how we could leverage or utilize our risk data more than just that risk table. So we're sitting just here in our work life. Maybe there's a major project coming up and these are the tasks for it. Or maybe this is the next 1 or 2 months and our task for the next 1 or 2 months. So you look at your current situation now. You assess risk and you figure out in the long risk list that task D in your next 1 or 2 months was the riskiest thing. Customer sale, installation, going to a new system in your company, whatever, employing somebody. Whatever the task was, you now flag that as a risky item just in the risk list, and it gets a high number in the list. Now, what could we do with that? A couple of things we could do. We could move that earlier in our schedule. So here's your new schedule over here. You might decide that task D before will be done in a month's time. But now we know it's a risky item, it got to a high number in the list. So we could decide to start task D earlier, maybe kind of start it now, okay, and get a handle on it, or start part of it now. Maybe this bit over here, the little bit in the end of the task, which was the really nerve-wracking bit of it, we're going to do an experiment or a pilot, or going to start it earlier, and we're going to do that up here early on in the schedule. Okay. So it gets dragged earlier in our plan, and it's going to have more ways to kind of look at it, and more time to recover should there be a problem. Before, the time to recover was from here to the end. Now the time to recover is from kind of here to here. We may not be able to do the whole thing. We might be able to, but we can start it and figure out kind of where we stand. We don't have to wait till the last minute to do it. We could do a mock-up or a trial. Okay? We could do an experiment. We could try something out in a lab in the customer's environment. We could talk to some friends. We could do a 1 month trial of the software and kind of see what happened. We don't have to wait until the last minute and purchase something or do something and then figure out that was a bad idea. We may be able to experiment or rent it or kind of try it out early. We could break the work down into more tasks. So maybe task D is a big thing, and we decide to give it more detail, and by doing that, we are mitigating the risk. So for example, when I move my kids from point A of the US to point B of the US, okay, we have one coming up soon. It's a 2,500 mile move, okay. Good job, Alicia. But in that case, that's a big risky thing to do. So I break it into details. It has a lot of risk to it. All the moving parts, people and machines and equipment and labor and whatever, hotels and cars. And so there's a detailed plan being put together for that again. And so if there's any concern about should we use A for this or B for that, I may kind of try them out or look at some reviews or whatever and do an experiment or an analysis of it before we get to that point. So I won't be able to avoid all problems, okay? But if I do have a problem on the trip, on the move, then I have more bandwidth left for the problems I have. So just giving you more detail can give you less risk on the project. Adding more time. Maybe task D is risky, and that's the one you want to add padding time to. Maybe the other ones don't have padding time added to them because they are low risk and they're going to go pretty well. But task D is a bear and could go bad, difficulty and whatever, and maybe you add 20% to it or 15%. And so if there is problems on that particular part of the project, then you have some kind of leeway, and these down here are not being impacted. So you could bring it earlier, get it started, and know where you stand. And if it really kind of determines to be a risky, difficult thing to go work on, maybe then you add more time to it, and then you can save time going downstream because you have less problems later on. You might change the decision that caused the risk. You have task D as risky because you or I actually chose task D as the solution. We decided to go that particular way with our solution. We might be able to backtrack and do something else. For example, on this move example, when I'm moving a child from point A to point B, the risk was expense at the beginning because it's a moving truck and labor and whatever. That expense of moving is caused by the decision to move stuff. Okay? If we backtrack and decide not to move stuff, then that risk kind of goes away, the expense risk. And maybe we sell the stuff at point A and buy the stuff for cheaper at point B. Okay? And maybe new stuff. And so don't assume that you have to put up with and mitigate every risk. You might look at the risk and figure out you actually ended up at that point because of a key decision, and actually you could backtrack backwards a little bit and then maybe have a different decision with a lower level of risk. Maybe the supplier you're using or the vendor or the machine or the equipment or the space or whatever. There's a different way to do it and a different risk that goes along with that. Now, these actions you're coming up with, the actions you had in the column of proactive actions before and backup plan, you can now add some of the bigger ones to your plan. Now your new plan, this is the lower risk plan, okay, lower risk. This is the one you're executing, and it is achievable, and by default, by definition, low risk. Back here, this is a high risk plan, and therefore maybe unachievable or very concerning. So the idea is to kind of think through what could go wrong, prioritize, mitigate that, and then build out of that a low risk plan. Not that you won't have any problems at all, but if you do have problems, then a lot of the other problems have gone away or been mitigated, and you now have more time to, or more bandwidth to cope with whatever problems you get faced with by that point. Now, I did mention in the beginning of the video, you can apply this to positive things too. Often people have more negative things on their list, and fewer positive. It's kind of a thing you have to practice doing. For example, in the O's here, things that could occur positive, we might sell all the days in this year. We might sell a new class again to a client. And if we do that, how could we leverage that? How could we get benefit out of that? Okay. So it's going to list as not guaranteed to occur, okay, but if it does occur, then we could kind of benefit. So I put the consequence. We could save for retirement more if we sell more stuff, okay. And if a client buys one class, they could tell other people in the same class or the same company to buy it too. And so the company I've sold it to, the time management course, happens to be a big entity, and they have spouses and they have friends and whatever, and if they like it, they can tell other people. And so bit by bit, the word kind of gets around. So I want to make it more likely they're going to buy the thing and it goes well, versus kind of not, because I can leverage that. I give each item a likelihood and impact number. Okay. Again, this is without any further action right now. Kind of status quo. No, what's the current likelihood and impact by doing this? And then the idea is to then make it more likely and more impactful. So on the risk, the negative one, we're making it less likely to occur and having a backup plan to protect ourselves if it does occur. In the positive risks, we're trying to make these higher numbers, okay, more likely if we can, and more impactful. So now the things over here are for the increase the likelihood and increase the impact. Okay. So again, there may be fewer of these on your list than the negative, which is just fine. But with a little bit of thought and practice, you may better come up with a couple of opportunities and maybe a couple of ways to make it more likely that you could do as going to leverage that. So in the example of the time management class, before I sold it, I reminded the coordinator of my proposal. It had been a while since she had actually contacted me, so I just kind of mentioned, how's it going? Did you see it? And whatever. We reminded the lady that they could have non-technical people there, so it could be a much broader audience than typical classes I do for them, and so that kind of helped kind of sell it too. They could reduce their per head cost by having other people in the class, in which you had accountants and admins and managers in the class too when we sold it. And I also reminded them of the size, because they could get their head count cost down by having 30 people there, and they could get the awareness up by having more word of mouth at the very end. So again, they weren't major things I could do, but there were things I could just kind of impact a little bit and kind of make it work out. Now in the end, I did sell the class. There were 30 people there. It worked out really well. The evaluations were very good. I extracted all the data out of the evaluation forms. I sent it back to the coordinator, so she knew for sure how well it went. And so we have another one booked later on. But the idea is they're going to sell more of that stuff. So again, I'm trying to make it more likely to either change the impact, the final benefits to me and them, and also the likelihood of them actually buying more stuff. Okay. So one question is how to make this list down here really robust. Okay. I think partly you come up with a list of concerns that you have, or your company concerns, by brainstorming all the things you worry about or could go wrong, go into the list. That should be your first place to kind of start. However, if you want to make the list a bit more robust, maybe kind of second time you do this, is to look at the list on the diagram here. I consider these things in the labels here to be essential things that a small business would do to be successful. You're not going to do them perfectly, and there could be things where you're going to doing far less well. But if you consider the list of things to be a pretty good list of how a company kind of runs, if you were to score less than 100%, here's 100%, less than that, you'll be down here somewhere or down there somewhere, Anytime you have less than 100%, this item may be worthy of then going into the list, because you're saying that there's either a potential problem or a likelihood downstream it could go south, or it's been south for a while and it may stay south. The risk is it's going to stay south or negative. Then you have another place you could put that item on the list. So if you really can suffer from product quality issues, okay, and you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, the problem you're addressing now is product quality, but the risk is it stays that way, okay, or doesn't get any better quickly. And so you're going to put down here product quality remains as its current level and will not improve rapidly enough over time. And therefore you've taken this score here and converted that into a risk area for the list. So anytime you look at this list on the diagram here, and you believe there are potential things that could go wrong, or even opportunities given that category, then add it back to the list. Okay? Even if you have a big, long list, you're still going to prioritize and work on a few of the things. So don't get overwhelmed by having too many things on the list. You can prioritize it, work on the first 2 or 3, leave the rest kind of there, and then after the first 2 or 3 have been worked on, then go down to the next list. I would say include your people, your staff if you have staff, or other colleagues in the discussion. They have very good ideas both on the risk list and the mitigation. And then look at the list maybe every month, okay, to kind of figure out kind of where you are. Some things will be mitigated and worked. Other actions will be tracked to closure, the mitigation actions. And then there'll be new risks that kind of crop up that weren't there before, or maybe the priority has changed, and therefore you want to update your list maybe every month. Okay? And by doing that, you're really kind of staying ahead of the game on a regular basis, avoiding major surprise and kind of staying sane. And even if you did have a surprise, or were not kind of sane at that point, you have more time on your hands, more capacity to go work on it, because now other things have been taken care of earlier on. Thank you for watching the video. If you would like help or want to read more articles, go take the web page here. There are many articles, more coming as I kind of work on them. And so please feel free to put a question down below or a comment, subscribe to the channel, and look out for next video. Thank you.